Are we in danger of having the 2021 NHL season cancelled? Based on recent remarks from Gary Bettman in NHL, it is a remote possibility. We'll discuss all the latest on what we know coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as we've mentioned here on the channel on numerous videos over the last couple of weeks, as we try to get information and try to get updates on what's happening with the negotiations to get the 2021 NHL season up and going. The last probably week to 10 days or so has been relatively and eerily quiet. We thought we were progressing well towards a resolution. Negotiations seem to be going relatively well, and then the owners came back to the Players Association at somewhat of a last minute here and kind of made it sound like they wanted to redo part of the CBA and change up the agreement when it comes to salary deferrals as well as the escrow percentages from the players as well. So obviously the players were very upset with this. I'm sure that in those negotiations and meetings there was probably things said on both sides and everybody seems to be kind of upset. We saw a period of time which looked like a number of days where we weren't getting any information and it looked like things were eerily quiet, which was obviously from a fan's perspective bad news because it made it sound like there wasn't really a whole heck of a lot of talking going on. Now we've seen more reports here in the past number of days that it seems like the Players Association and the league, so Bettman and Fair, are having more regular discussions again. The return to play committee's back to having more meetings, and they're back to work trying to get things hammered out. But obviously, when things went sideways and some things got leaked from the players' side into the media, the owners have kind of been getting a lot of bad press and a lot of bad, comments on social media that we've seen, basically getting a lot of the blame here as to why things are not progressing and we don't have a formalized return scheduled yet. But there's a lot of things going on here to factor in. We actually had Commissioner Gary Bettman do some media today and have some remarks. So we actually, for the first time in a while, had to hear him speak to see what is the latest update from their side of things. Where are things standing and what are we at? So let's take a look at his comments here and then we'll discuss a little bit further what we think it all means and what we're looking at. And are we looking at a real possibility that the season could be canceled? So here are the comments from Bettman, and I'll put it up on the screen so you can follow along here. He says, under our deal and the one we've had for more than a decade with the Players Association, whatever the revenues are, the players only get 50%. And if we overpay them and they don't pay us back in the short term, they have to pay us back over the long term. There will be stresses on the system, and we've had discussions about what those stresses are and how they might be dealt with. But we're not trying to say you must do X, Y, and Z, or we're trying to look for ways to continue to work together here. I know it's been portrayed as something else, and it's unfortunate and it's inaccurate because at the end of the day, if the system gets stressed, it's going to be stressed for both of us. If we have to pay out lots of cash, 2/3 of which is going to come back to us, that may cause some stresses, but we can or will have to deal with it if we're going to move forward. And by the same token, if the players owe us more money than anybody imagined, the salary cap could well be flat or close to flat for the next 5 or 6 years. And the players in the future will be repaying what we're owed. So the question isn't like, whoa, we demand a renegotiation. To the contrary, it's we see the way the system's going to be impacted. It's something that makes sense to deal with in the context of everything else that we have to do, which is out of the ordinary and unanticipated in order to be in a position to possibly play. Obviously, Bettman is saying that they're not trying to renegotiate. They're not trying to go back on a deal. But from the players' side, they're saying, well, we already factored in a worst-case scenario, which from what we're hearing did include not having fans in attendance. So it makes you wonder how all of a sudden now we're having this massive shortfall of cash that the owners are going to be paying out that, is obviously going to be lopsided in the way of the players this year. So based on the 50-50 splits, the players would likely get more than 50%, and they would end up owing a bunch more back into the future. So the current players seem to be not real interested in deferring more money or putting up the escrow. So therefore, the future players would be the ones that end up kind of with this debt that would end up paying back, and we'd see a salary cap that would remain flat a lot longer than we were anticipating. We originally were thinking 2 or 3 years after everything got hammered out with the new CBA. But now, based on these new numbers and what the owners are saying, that it could be upwards of 5 or 6 years without an increased salary cap, which is really going to hurt a lot of teams. And obviously, at the end of the day, that's going to hurt players because their salaries are not going to go up. There's going to be a lot of players in the next 5-6 years, which are going to be in their prime years looking for those big raises that are not going to be able to get them. And I think you're going to end up in a situation possibly that you could even end up with seeing part of the PA kind of divided against itself, because I think depending on where players are at in their career, they very well might have a different take on this. I think the younger you are, you're probably more likely to say, you know what, let's just defer some more money, let's work with them. But if you already get that big time contract and you know what you're going to be getting paid for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you might be less willing to negotiate on that and say, no, a deal's a deal, and that's that. So we'll see what happens. But I've heard comments from different agents saying that if they had to vote on it today, that their guys would vote to play versus not. So I don't know. Elliot Friedman, NHL Insider, still thinks that we're going to have a season, that they're going to be able to overcome this. But still, it's unnerving to hear these kind of talks going on. Now, we've also heard from Friedman that he has reports from his sources saying there's as many as 12 owners who would rather not play. And there's been other comments saying that they have what they call force majeure, which is like a clause in the CBA that they can cancel the season due to unforeseen circumstances. But I know many player agents and lawyers are saying that if the owners tried to cancel the season, that the players would certainly have a very strong legal case to go to them and fight it in court and to get a bunch of money paid out to them, obviously due to lost salaries and whatnot, because this pandemic has been ongoing since March, and this agreement was come to terms well into the pandemic. It's not like the pandemic and the possibility of not having fans was something that they could not have predicted when this deal was negotiated. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to have to see a little bit of give and take here. I know it's also been reported by Friedman a few times that when in the meetings when the Players Association were being presented with a plan that they were going to be a $300 million shortfall, and the owners were hoping they would defer more money and put an escrow up, that they were told basically, money is the cheapest to borrow than it ever has been in basically the history. And a lot of owners were really not happy with that. They were really upset. A lot of hurt feelings on both sides there. So, we'll see what happens. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And Commissioner Gary Bettman still, today even, says he's targeting a January 1st opening date. And I don't see how that's going to be possible anymore. I really don't. I mean, I guess we'll see if they can magically pull something out of the air here. But they'd have to have shortened training camps, which I think is a real possibility. I know there's a lot of players in their NHL cities or in other leagues right now that are already skating, so it shouldn't take them as long to get into shape. And there's talk that could be condensed as much as 10 to 12 days for camp. And the other thing is that there's a real possibility due to the complexity of calling up players that they could be allowed to carry a bigger roster. They won't all count against the cap, but they can have a taxi squad and have up to probably 35, maybe 34 players, so that calling up players is easier. So they won't have to make as many roster decisions right away as well, which will also get them going a little bit faster too. And they have more luxury there to kind of switch players in and out a little more freely, which will impact things too. So obviously, there's all that. And there's still talk that the Canadian division is definitely going to go if they can get everything hammered out here, because it's pretty much a given that with the border closure, there's just no other way to do it. And Freeman also mentioned that one of the other big things that are being negotiated here is that obviously, if you look at it, where all the U.S. teams would be 3 divisions of 8, and clearly you have your Eastern, your Central, and your West. Well, there's easily 8 teams you can put in the East, no problem. But when it comes to which teams are going to go into Central and the Western divisions, there is some debate over who's going to go where, and some things will have to be ironed out. And he's saying right now it's likely that the Minnesota Wild would have to go in and play with the Western team. So you'd have like the 3 California teams in there. You'd have Vegas. You'd have Arizona. Probably Colorado and Minnesota would be my guess as far as what the Western Conference will look like. Or, of course, you get Dallas in there too. So, obviously, some of these teams could go in the West. They could go in the Central. There's a couple teams that could go in the East or the Central too. So they have to get that hammered out. That's a little bit less of an issue at this point. But, at the end of the day here, I think we're going to have to probably see some give on the player side of things. But hopefully they can negotiate something in return to make it worth their while. However, I did come across some information from Puckpedia.com on their Twitter account, which actually I thought was very interesting and something that I'm sure the Players Association is looking at and might be considering, that if the players actually do agree to defer more money, that they can do this without putting up escrow. They can do it strictly through deferrals if they really chose to do that, because obviously in that scenario now, they would get more money deferred, so they get less money now. but they would also get more of it back in the future because they'd be deferring payments on that when they've already agreed to lower escrow percentages. So that only makes sense. Like, for example, like some players are going to be getting as much as, well into the thousands of dollars back in their pocket by getting paid this money later. I mean, you would like to think that a lot of these players are going to be making enough money that, to defer some more money for a little while would be doable. I mean, depending on what kind of lifestyle they lead, but still, it's a situation where they will benefit financially. And you know what? Maybe they can negotiate the fact that this money gets paid back with some interest. I mean, maybe that's one of their bargaining chips. I mean, what else are they going to ask for here? I'm not sure what else they can do, what they would want. But still, something's going to have to give. But there does appear to be the talk coming from the owners to me just sounds a little bit like almost, even though they're not using the words and it's not really the same scenario exactly, it just reminds me a little bit of the lockout that we saw before. And I don't know how much force the owners are trying to use here to get the players to bend. But at the end of the day, I do feel, in my own personal opinion, that the players are going to have to give in here at least a little bit. And you know what? To some degree, it might be worth their while, like I said, for strictly from a financial perspective, to make more of their money later when escrow's lower. But still, the current players right now are going to end up owing the owners more money at the current rates. And if they don't do something about it now, it's the future generation and the younger players that are going to have to end up paying more of it later in their career. And I would not be surprised at some point here if you kind of get a divided PA and things could get even nasty or hostile even amongst themselves, really. I guess we'll see how things go. But from what we're hearing, there's lots of reason to still be somewhat optimistic. But there's also reason to think that this could all end up, kind of blowing up here. And there could be a real possibility for the first time, I think, that we can say that there's the chance that the season won't happen. And of course, you get all the COVID stuff going on as well, which is also an issue. There's several NHL cities where, it might be awfully difficult for teams to get into their buildings and play. And there's all those logistics too. But right now, that kind of seems to be almost the least of the worries, but it's still something big that needs to be sorted out. So let me know your thoughts on all the comments from Gary Bettman today. Do you think we're going to have a season? What's a likely start date? Personally, for me, I don't think January 1st is really all that realistic anymore. I think we're looking at more like middle of January or maybe even February 1st. But let me know what you think down below so we can all discuss further as a community. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you next time.